You can be my daddy if you want, said the little girl to the cowboy with no home. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The sky over Willow Creek had turned the color of smoke. Wind carried dust through the empty street, rattling loose shutters and bending the old church sign until it creaked like a warning. Clay Mercer rode slow through it, tall in the saddle, coat torn, hat low. He looked like a man who'd run out of places to run. The rain started spitting cold and mean, soaking through his shoulders before he reached the hitching post outside the saloon. Inside, piano keys clattered weakly under a tired tune. A few cowhands nursed cheap whiskey. Nobody looked up when Clay pushed through the swinging doors, except one man in the corner who never stopped watching strangers. Clay ordered coffee. Whiskey burned too much these days. His voice was gravel, his eyes worn. He didn't mean to stay long, just long enough to dry out. Then he heard the talk, low voices at the bar. "Marshall Reddin's got the Harlan girl in a fix," said one ranch hand. "Her pa's gambling debts due, and Reddin don't take cash." Laughter followed, the kind that made Clay's jaw tighten. He'd known men like Reddin, lawmen with dirty souls and clean badges. Before he could stop himself, Clay's hand went to the scar under his collar, the reminder of everything he'd failed to save. He pushed the coffee away, stood, and left without another word. Outside, the storm broke full. The rain came sideways, thunder rolling over the town like judgment. He headed for the livery to find shelter, but that's when he saw her, a small figure, maybe 6 or 7, kneeling beside a crooked wooden cross at the edge of the churchyard. Barefoot, soaked through, clutching a ragged doll, Clay dismounted slowly. "You got folks, little one?" he asked. The girl didn't look up. Her voice was soft, trembling. "Mama's gone. She said someone would come." Clay's heart twisted. He'd buried too many words like that. "What's your name, darlin'?" "Lila," she said. "Mama said you'd be him." "Him? The man who'd take care of me." She finally looked up, big brown eyes filled with rain and hope. And before Clay could think of a single thing to say, she whispered, "You can be my daddy if you want." The thunder cracked again. Clay just stood there, rain dripping off his hat, staring at this tiny soul who somehow saw through every wall he'd built. He should have walked away. But he didn't. He lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the saloon, lights flickering in the storm. The saloon looked warmer from the outside than it felt inside. Smoke hung thick, lamps flickered low, and piano notes stumbled through the air like they'd lost their way. When Clay stepped in, soaked through and carrying the girl in his arms, every head turned. He set Lila down by the stove near the bar, where the heat still fought the cold. Her small hands trembled as she reached toward it, and Clay took off his coat to drape around her shoulders. That a voice broke through the quiet. "You lost a little something there, stranger." Clay looked up. A woman stood behind the bar, wiping her hands on a linen cloth. Ellie Harland. He'd heard her name from the whispers earlier, the saloon owner's daughter. She was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s, with auburn hair tied back and eyes that carried more weariness than they should have. Her beauty wasn't polished. It was the kind that came from surviving hard years and still finding ways to smile. "She's not mine," Clay said quietly. "Found her out by the churchyard. Said her mama's gone." The room hushed again. Someone muttered a prayer. Ellie walked around the counter, kneeling beside the girl. "Hey there, sweetheart. You hungry?" Lila nodded, too shy to speak. Ellie called for stew from the kitchen, then brushed wet strands of hair from the girl's forehead. "You're safe now. What's your name, honey?" "Lila," she whispered. "Well, Lila," Ellie said softly, "you're mighty brave being out there alone." When she looked up at Clay, there was something in her eyes, curiosity, maybe gratitude. "You did a good thing bringing her here, Mr. Mercer." Clay Mercer. Her eyebrows lifted just a bit. "We don't get many men doing good things in this town, Mr. Mercer." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Wasn't planning to stay. You might have to. Storms flooding the trail east." She stood and poured him a cup of coffee. "Sit a spell. You look like you've been running from something." That he didn't answer, but she didn't push. Instead, she turned to Lila, setting a bowl of stew in front of her. The girl ate quietly, sneaking glances at Clay between spoonfuls like she was making sure he wasn't going to vanish. Ellie leaned closer to him. "She's got no one." "Not that," she said. Ellie exhaled. "Then she'll need a place tonight." "You too, looks like." Clay hesitated. Don't mean to impose, you're not, she said simply. The upstairs rooms are clean. You can take the end one that as she turned away. Clay noticed the bruise on her wrist faint, round, like a man's grip. He didn't ask, but he noticed the way her hand shook as she set the mug down, that he glanced toward the corner, where two men in dark coats watched her a little too closely. One of them, tall and mean-looking, tapped the badge on his chest with a smirk. Marshal Redden. Clay recognized the type. Law on paper, wrought underneath. When the marshal caught his gaze, he smiled. Evening, stranger. Looks like you picked an interesting night to ride into Willow Creek that didn't come for trouble. Clay said that Redden's smile didn't fade. Trouble don't care what a man came for. Ellie stepped between them, her voice steady. Marshal, please. Let him be. He's just passing through. The lawman's eyes lingered on her too long before he finally turned away. Clay said nothing. He just finished his coffee and watched Ellie walk back behind the bar, shoulders tense, pretending not to feel Redden stare. When the storm outside deepened, Clay helped Lila upstairs, tucked her into the spare bed, and sat by the window. He should have been gone by morning, but something about that little girl's trust, and the way Ellie looked when she tried to be brave, made the thought of leaving sit heavy in his chest. Below, the piano started again, soft and sad. Morning came slow to Willow Creek. The storm had broken some time before dawn, leaving puddles in the dirt streets and steam rising from the rooftops. The town smelled of rain, whiskey, and regret. Clay was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, cleaning his revolver. The sound of soft footsteps made him glance up. Lila stood in the doorway, clutching her doll. You're still here, she said quietly. He smiled a little. Guess I am. You ain't gonna leave, right? Clay hesitated, the words catching in his throat. Not today. That seemed to satisfy her. She climbed up onto the chair by the window, staring at the light breaking over the hills. Mama said the sun means God smiling. Clay felt something twist in him, that strange ache of remembering what it felt like to believe in things. Downstairs, the saloon was waking up. Ellie was behind the bar, her hair tied loose this morning, humming under her breath as she wiped tables. When she saw Clay come down with Lila, her face softened. Morning, she said. Sleep any better than the thunder? Didn't sleep much, Clay answered. You. I've had worse nights. Lila climbed onto a stool and looked at the tray of biscuits Ellie had just set out. Can I have one? Ellie smiled and handed her one. Only if you promise not to grow up faster than I can keep up with. That drew a laugh out of Clay, small, but real. Ellie noticed. You should laugh more often, she said, eyes meeting his. It suits you. Before he could answer, the saloon doors swung open. Two men walked in, Redden and his deputy. The whole room went quiet again, that Ellie's smile faded. Marshal, she said. Morning, Miss Harland. Redden's voice dripped with charm, the kind that always had something ugly underneath. Heard you had company last night. Clay stood slowly, his hand resting near his holster, not on it, just close enough. Men can't even get dry in peace? Clay asked. Redden chuckled. Just making sure our fine town don't trouble. Looks to me like it already has, Clay said evenly. The deputy stiffened, but Redden raised a hand, still smiling. You've got spirit, stranger. Don't lose it too fast. He turned to Ellie. About that debt your daddy left, I'm thinking we settle it soon. Maybe tonight that I told you I'd get the money, she said, voice low. You keep saying that, sweetheart. But time runs out. He tipped his hat and walked out, the deputy trailing behind him. When the door shut, Ellie let out a breath she'd been holding too long. Her hands trembled. Clay stepped closer. You don't owe that man anything. That it's not that simple, she said quietly. My father borrowed from him to keep the saloon open. Redden's been bleeding me since he died. I just can't pay him off fast enough. You ever think about leaving? This is my home, she said. The only one I've got. Lila tugged at Clay's sleeve. He's mean. You can make him go away, right? Clay looked at the girl, then back at Ellie. Not yet, he said. But soon he walked to the door and looked out toward the marshal's office across the street. The man's laughter carried on the wind. Clay had heard that sound before, back in a town that no longer existed, from men who'd burned it down. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't in a long while: purpose. That night, as the lamps dimmed and the saloon quieted, Clay stayed by the window again, keeping watch while Lila slept. Down below, Ellie moved quietly, locking up till he watched her pause by the bar, pressing her hand over her heart as if trying to calm it. She looked up once toward the stairs, and though she couldn't see him in the shadows, she smiled, faintly tired but thankful. Clay exhaled. Maybe this time he wouldn't run. Night settled over Willow Creek in shades of gold and ash. The storm had left the sky clean, stars sharp enough to cut through the dark. From the upstairs window, Clay watched the town quiet down, lamps flickering out one by one, laughter fading into the wind. Downstairs, Ellie was closing up again. Clay could hear the soft rattle of glasses, the thud of chairs being stacked. He should have gone to bed, but something in him couldn't rest. Not tonight. When he came down, she didn't startle. She just looked up from the counter and smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep either. He shook his head. Never been good at it. She poured 2 cups of coffee, one for him, one for herself, and they sat near the window where the moonlight pooled like silver dust. You ever wonder, she said after a long silence, how a person can end up somewhere they never meant to be? Clay's gaze stayed on the street outside. Every day, she turned the cup in her hands. My daddy wasn't a bad man. He just made bad bets. Thought he could outsmart Redden. When he died, the marshal said the debt came to me. I didn't have much choice. Clay studied her the way she kept her chin up, even as her eyes trembled. You always this strong, she smiled softly. Only when I have to be. That he looked down at his hands, rough, scarred, tired. I used to wear a badge, he said, years back. Thought I was doing right. Thought the world could be fixed with a gun and a steady hand. Her eyes lifted. What happened? There was a family, he said slowly. A man I arrested swore revenge. Came back while I was away. Burned their place down. Wife. Boy. They never had a chance. The silence after that was heavy. Ellie reached across the table, hesitated, then rested her hand lightly over his. You don't have to carry that alone. Clay didn't pull away. For the first time in years, someone's touch didn't feel like a reminder of what he'd lost. It felt like something he could still have. They sat like that for a long while. Outside, the wind whispered through the empty street. Then a noise shattered the quiet, a crash from outside, followed by a shout. Clay was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn. Ellie stood, heart racing. He moved to the window, peering through the glass. 3 of Redden's men stood in the street, drunk and laughing, as they smashed a lantern against the saloon sign. The wood caught fire at the edge. Stay here, Clay said. Clay was already at the door. Outside, he strode through the glow of the flames, the night wind tearing at his coat. The men froze when they saw him. Put it out, Clay said quietly. Point one laughed. Ain't your place, stranger. Clay stepped closer. It is now. He didn't draw, but his tone carried enough weight to make them hesitate. Then one spat at his boots. You ain't scaring nobody. Old man. Clay's fist moved faster than the insult. The man hit the dirt. The second swung and got dropped just as quick. The third backed off, muttering curses, as he dragged his friends away, to be why the time Ellie came. Out. The fire was dying under Clay's boot. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the familiar rush of violence he'd sworn he'd left behind. She looked at him in the flickering light. You didn't have to do that. He met her gaze. Yeah, I did. Ellie stepped closer, voice soft. Redden's not going to forget this. Good, Clay said. Neither will I. She looked up at him. Tears in her eyes, not from fear this time, but something else. Gratitude. Hope. Maybe both. Thank you, she whispered. He tipped his hat slightly. Wasn't nothing. But they both knew it was. That night, when he went back upstairs, Lila stirred in her sleep and reached out a hand. Clay knelt beside her bed. You okay, darlin'? He said softly. Her fingers brushed his sleeve. You were fightin' bad men again, huh? He smiled faintly. Maybe a few. That you're good at it. Try not to be, she yawned. Mama said heroes don't always wear shiny hats. That he felt his chest tighten. She sounds like she was a smart lady, she said. Somebody would come for me. I think she meant you. Clay sat there long after she fell asleep, listening to the quiet creak of the saloon below, and wondering when the last time was that he'd felt this close to belonging. The next day came with a wind that felt like trouble. Even the horses in the street were restless, stamping and snorting as if they could smell it. Inside the saloon, the morning crowd was thinner than usual. Word had already spread about Clay Mercer standing up to Redden's men, about the fire that didn't quite catch, about the look in the old lawman's eyes when he told them to leave. Ellie tried to keep busy, but her hands shook more than they should. She caught herself glancing toward the door every few minutes, half expecting Redden to come through it. Clay sat at one of the corner tables, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a horse. Lila watched him with wide eyes, the kind of quiet wonder only a child could hold. "That one's for you," he said, handing it to her. She grinned. "He needs a name. Guess you should pick one then." She thought for a moment. "Hope," she said finally. Clay smiled. "Good name." Ellie overheard and looked up from behind the bar. Their eyes met a small exchange, quiet but full of something growing stronger every day. The door slammed open. Marshal Redden walked in, flanked by his two deputies. His boots were polished. His smile wasn't. "Well," he said, voice carrying across the room, "seems I've got a hero in my town. Fella thinks he can raise his hand against the law." Clay didn't move. "Wasn't law I was raising it against." Redden's smile faded. "You think because you used to wear a badge, you can come in here and tell me how to run my town? I think there's right and there's wrong," Clay said. "And I've seen enough of both to tell what you are." Gasps rippled through the room. Ellie stepped out from behind the bar. "Marshal, please. He's done nothing wrong." Redden's eyes flicked to her. "You keep standing up for this drifter, Ellie, and folks start thinking you owe him more than gratitude." Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "You don't scare me." Redden leaned in close enough that Clay could see the twitch of his jaw. "You should be scared, darlin'. Debts have a way of collecting themselves." Clay stood. "That's enough." Redden smirked. "Then maybe you'd like to settle hers yourself. Out behind the jail tonight. Bring your gun. Or I'll burn this place to the ground with the girl inside." He tipped his hat to Ellie, then turned and strode out, spurs clinking against the floorboards. The silence he left behind was thick that Ellie's breath came shaky. "He'll do it. Clay, I know. What are you going to do?" Clay holstered his revolver. "What I should have done a long time ago." He turned to Lila, kneeling in front of her. "You stay with Miss Ellie tonight, all right? No matter what happens." Lila's lip trembled. "You're coming back, ain't you?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, darlin'. I'll come back." She hugged him tight around the neck. "You're my daddy now. You gotta promise." He swallowed hard. "I promise." That evening, as the sun bled red over the desert, Clay walked out toward the edge of town. The street was empty, doors shut, curtains drawn. The air smelled of dust and rain that never came. Redden was waiting behind the jail, coat open, hand resting easy near his gun. "You sure about this, Mercer?" "Been sure since last night," Clay said. "Then let's see if you're half the legend you used to be." The world seemed to hold its breath. The draw came fast. Too fast. The sound cracked like thunder. For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Redden staggered, shock spreading across his face, and fell into the dirt. Clay stood still, smoke curling from his barrel, chest heaving. He hadn't wanted it, but it was done. When he turned, Ellie was there. She'd followed, heart pounding, unable to stay away. "Clay," she whispered. He holstered his gun, eyes tired. "It's over." She stepped close, reaching for his hand. "You saved us." He shook his head. "Just made things right." But when she looked at him, her eyes didn't see a broken man anymore. They saw someone who finally stopped running. The dawn came quiet, no gunfire. No shouting. Just the low hum of wind across the rooftops and the cry of a distant hawk. Clay Mercer sat on the edge of the saloon's porch, hat in his hands. His shirt was torn at the shoulder where a bullet had grazed him, but the pain was dull now, distant, almost cleansing. Ellie stepped out with a blanket draped around her shoulders. Her hair was loose, her face pale but calm. For a moment, she just looked at him. The man who'd wandered into her life like a ghost, and somehow given it back its colored town's awake. She said softly, "They found Redden. Sheriff from Fort Clay's riding in to take charge." Clay nodded. "That's good. Town deserves better." She came down the steps and sat beside him. "You should rest. I've rested enough in my life." They sat in silence for a while. The saloon behind them still smelled faintly of smoke and whiskey. Across the street, a few townsfolk were sweeping up glass, patching walls, trying to start over. Ellie looked at him carefully. "You think you'll keep riding? Keep moving like before?" He turned the hat in his hands. Used to think I didn't have a choice. That wanderin' was the only thing I was good for. He looked at her. Now I ain't so sure. The door creaked open, and Lila came out in her nightdress, rubbing her eyes. She stopped when she saw Clay and smiled sleepily. "Morning, Cowboy," she said. Clay smiled back. "Mornin', darlin'." She walked straight to him and climbed onto his lap like she'd been doing it all her life. "Mama says you're stayin'." Clay blinked. "Mama," Ellie flushed a little but didn't deny it. "She's taken to calling me that," she said with a shrug. "I don't mind." Lila looked between them, curious and bright. "You ain't leavin', right? You said you promised." Clay's throat tightened. He remembered that promise, made in the middle of a night that could have been his last. "Yeah," he said finally. "I keep my promises." Ellie smiled, small, genuine, and tired in the best way. "You'd be welcome here." Clay. "Lord knows this town could use a man who remembers what right feels like." He chuckled. "Not sure I know what that is anymore." She tilted her head. "You do. You just showed us." Lila leaned her head on his chest. "We can make a home." "Huh?" "Like in stories." Clay looked at her, then at Ellie. The words didn't come easy, but they came true. "Yes, sweetheart. We can make one." The three of them sat there as the sun crested the horizon, slow, golden, and warm. The light touched the saloon sign, the street, the empty chair where Redden once sat. That it felt like forgiveness. By noon, the sheriff's riders came and went. They took the body, took statements, took the weight off Clay's shoulders. No charges. Just a nod of understanding between men who'd both seen too much. When it was over, Clay found Ellie out back hanging laundry. He stopped beside her, watching the clothes sway in the breeze. "That I could build that fence out by the pasture," he said. "Keep the horses from wandering." She looked at him, a teasing glint in her eye. "You plannin' on sticking around long enough to finish it?" He smiled. "If I'm invited." Her gaze softened. "You are." For the first time in years, Clay Mercer felt the weight of the road lift off his back. Not gone, but lighter, replaced by something steadier. That evening, the saloon opened its doors not for gamblers, but for folks who wanted to sing again. Laughter filled the room. Music floated out into the street. Ellie played the piano, her voice gentle and sure. Lila twirled between tables in her new boots. And Clay leaned against the bar, watching them both like a man who'd finally found the thing he didn't know he was missing. When Ellie looked up and caught his eyes, she smiled mid-song, a look that said, "You're home now." And for once he believed it.